In this lecture, we will discuss the urinary system. Part 1, we will look at the different components and the structure of the kidney. There are several organs associated with the urinary system. We have the kidneys, we have the ureters, we have the urinary bladder, and the urethra. There are various functions associated with each of these structures. In this lecture, we will go through the structures and then look at some of their functions. Functions of the urinary system as a whole is to remove salts, nitrogenous waste, say from metabolic processes. When there is waste products that are being produced, urinary system helps eliminate those, and it helps balance the concentration of electrolytes and water, maintain a homeostasis of the various electrolytes in our body. It regulates pH and body fluid volume. So if we drink a lot of water, if we take in a lot of excess fluid, it will eliminate the excess. If we don't take in as much, it will help conserve the fluid that we have. And it helps control the red blood cell production. We talked about how the component erythropoietin is being produced by the kidneys, the renal system, and that erythropoietin is important once it gets to the bone marrow in the production of red blood cells. And it helps maintain blood pressure. So some of very important functions are regulated, maintained by the kidneys or the urinary system as a whole. Kidneys, these are reddish brown, bean-shaped organs. They are about 12 centimeters long, and they are covered with a tough fibrinous capsule. The kidneys are located retroperitoneally. Retroperitoneal meaning they are in the posterior aspect. There is an aspect where these are underneath most of the structures, and we will have a look to see where these are. They lie alongside the vertebral column. On either side of the vertebral column, the left kidney is positioned slightly higher than the right kidney. So let's go through a virtual dissection and see the location of the kidneys and its relative position. So once we remove the upper layer, we see first certain structures here. We see the mesentery, we see all these structures that are covering the small and the large intestine. Then here we see the gallbladder, here we see the liver, and here we see the stomach. So no kidney visible yet. When we take in some of these structures out, the mesentery, when we take those connective tissues, now we start seeing the small intestines, the mesentery is right here, and we have like part of the liver taken out, gallbladder taken out, but still we don't see the kidneys. When we go a layer beneath, once we take all the intestines, all of them out, now we start seeing the kidney. So here we see the two kidney structures, here we see the spleen right here, and here we see two large vessels, a vein and an artery. How we know the vein and the artery? The artery is more of a solid structure. You see that it doesn't collapse on itself. The vein is slightly wider and it collapses on itself. So this is the inferior vena cava, and then this is the abdominal aorta, and we'll look at them in some slides a little bit further. So once we've removed these vessels away, we see the structure of the kidney, or like a section of the kidney, showing all these different components, which we'll look into in more detail. So as we can see, in the upper urinary tract, we have the kidneys found on either sides. Then we have the bladder right here, and then we have the ureters, one from each kidney, that brings the urine that was produced into the bladder. So now let's discuss a little bit about the kidney structure. The kidney has a cortex and a medulla. The lateral side is convex. the medial side is concave. And there is a medial depression in the kidneys, a hilum that leads into renal sinuses. Inside these renal sinuses, we have structures known as renal pelvis, and these are some of the important structures when it comes to the production of urine. So I know there are some names here. We will look at an image and see where these names, where these structures are located. Okay. So looking at a kidney just from the outside still, we see the bean-shaped structure. Here we see the ureters, and we see this hilum structure right here. And when all these inner structures join, they form the renal pelvis that then forms the ureter. Here what we see is shown the renal artery, that is where the blood comes in from. And then these three components here shown are the renal veins. And outer is the renal capsule, the tough capsule that we mentioned. I mentioned that the kidneys have two major regions, the renal medulla and the renal cortex. Renal medulla is where most of the functions of the kidneys happen. They consist of cone-shaped structures called the renal pyramids. And these are important because these have a lot of vasculature, a lot of tubules for the production of urine. Renal cortex, it surrounds the renal medulla and it extends, and extensions to the cortex are called the renal columns. These act more of a support function to the function within the medulla. Has granular appearance due to the presence of tiny round structures called renal capsules. So renal capsules are going to be part of the functional units of the kidney, which is the nephrons. So most of the nephrons are located within the renal medulla. The renal cortex contains the renal capsule, like almost the starting point of the nephron. Again, looking at the anatomy of the kidney, we see the cortex on the outer side, medulla is on the inner side, and within the medulla, you have these pyramids where most of these nephrons are located. Looking at a section of the kidney, we see how these pyramids form the papillae, uh, like triangle-like structures that gives rise to the minor calyces, all these collection tubules. These tubules, once urine is formed in these pyramids, they are being collected, then into major calyces, and that goes into the ureter through the renal pelvis. Okay. So looking at the structure of the kidney, we talked about how nephron was the functional unit of the kidney. So all these renal pyramids line with these tubules from the nephrons right here. So these are the ones that forms the pyramids. So nephrons are a structure like this where it has a renal capsule we talked about, and then it has these tubules that are descending, ascending, and we'll talk about the structure in more detail. Again, looking at the kidney anatomy, the cortex, the medulla, the renal pyramids, and the columns that are there to separate the pyramids as part of the supportive structure. And this again puts all the parts that we discuss in perspective all together. And let's go through this one more time. So on the outer side, you have the renal capsule all the way on the outer side. Then we have the renal cortex, which is the surrounding structure, a support structure. And then we have the renal pyramids, these structures that are right here. They contain most of the nephrons and the tubules. Then once urine is produced, you have these minor calyces that will be a collection of these collecting ducts, and they form the major calyces. The major calyces then go on to form the ureter. We have to have good vasculature where we have arteries bringing in blood for the filtration process, and then veins taking blood away from the kidney. In the next part, we will discuss the kidney and the function of the nephron.